Don't reject new technology, embrace it and see how it can benefit you.
Welcome to another episode of the Unmanned podcast powered by USI. Today we get to sit down with Ron Leach, the founder of Leach Strategic Partners and a colleague of Ray Adams, both of the Cape Atlantic UAS test range. We get to better understand how drones impact public safety and provide important resources to the men and women of the police force. As a helicopter pilot for the New Jersey State Police himself, we'll touch on what helicopters do good and what drones do better, or worse. Another chance for you and I to get a peek behind the curtain and the unique roles drones play in our daily lives. Let's go. You know, here at the Unmanned podcast, we like to explore different topics and themes. And today with you on board, I think really what we want to talk about is public safety and how the drone industry has impacted the public safety side of the house. I know you are partnered with Ray over there at the Cape May testing facility for drone integration, and we'll briefly touch on that. But I'm interested to hear about how somebody like you moved from the state trooper world where you're on the ground, doing God's work for keeping us safe, and moving into manned aviation still with the state troopers, which is super cool. And then kind of transitioning into or bringing in the drone world into policing and public safety. So give our listeners a little bit about your background and how that kind of process went from trooper to where we are today.
Perfectly honest, I fell into my role. It wasn't something I set out in life to do, was be a state trooper or a pilot for that matter. It happened when I got out of the Navy in 87. I was a volunteer firefighter EMT, and we're on a job one night, and I see a state police helicopter coming in to pick up a patient from a car crash. And I had no idea that even existed. And I thought, that looks like a really cool job. So long story short, I kind of, instead of going down that public safety career on the fire side, I pivoted to the police side. Went through the state police process, which was about a 2-year ordeal. Went through the academy and then started working on getting my pilot certifications. After about 5 years on the road, I was fortunate enough to land a job within the Aviation Bureau. And then after that, for the next 15 years, that's what I did. I flew all mission profiles for the state police, from flying the governor to medevac jobs to photo flights to funeral flyovers. After about 15 years, one of the bosses says, "Hey, we got some projects. We'd like some input on it. You interested in moving up to the section level to work?" And I thought, you know what? Change is good, right? And one of those projects happened to be drones, right? And this is probably 2015. Drones were just really starting to become popular with public safety. And so we put together a working group, which I chaired. And within 6 months, we went from a blank sheet of paper to having policies and procedures, pilot selection process, what rules we're going to try to fly under, getting some interest. Any bureau unit, within the Division of State Police, if they had an interest in flying drones, let's come to the table so we can talk about how we can integrate them into the division operations.
What aircraft were you guys utilizing at the time for helicopters? Was it the Jet Ranger?
So everybody starts out, when you're brought into the Aviation Bureau, you start out at Trenton and you do your primary training there on Jet Rangers, Long Rangers. Okay. They farm you out just because of the aircraft time. They just can't do 100% pilot training. They'll farm you out to get your commercial instrument, and they'll bring you back in. And then you'll start working on your advanced ratings. And at the time, it was the Sikorsky S-76B, which was our primary for the medevac. We were the first public safety organization to do medevac in the 76.
I did some Jet Ranger time myself in flight school. That's why I had asked, because that's a nice little helicopter.
We had a 58 as a surplus. That was one of our aircraft there. So I'm sure you've got some time in those, right? Just a few hours on in there. But primarily in the Black Hawk was my my aircraft, my platform, and about 2,000 hours there. So that's pretty cool. So let's talk aviation for a second. Let's leverage your aviation background and as a helicopter pilot. And where do you see drones outperforming helicopters
and where do you see helicopters still making sense? Because it's an interesting dynamic, especially with the low altitude flyers like you and myself. How do we integrate with drones? Where do we see them fitting in? Where are they better? Where are they worse? What's your thoughts there?
So you hit it right on the head. Low altitude flyers like ourselves. That's the world that drones live in, right? I think from my position, it's easier to tell me what an inappropriate use case for a drone is rather than what you can use them for, because it's really limitless. It's in the mind of the person that wants to use the technology. Um, I don't think we're going to see drones taking over, knocking police aviation or public safety aviation out anytime soon, because there's limitations to it, right? Drones can't transport people, but what can they do in the interim, right? So middle of the night, you get a job, you're going to wait for a helicopter crew to get up, pull the aircraft out, and shoot down to a job, for a search, right? What if that patrolman or that trooper on the ground or that fire guy has a drone in the trunk of their truck or their vehicle? Launch that thing, get eyes up immediately, right? So you're going to cut down some of that time, waiting for a helicopter. It's a void filler, right? Full scale aviation has its purpose. And I think drones are a natural fit. I do talk to some public safety pilots who are like, nah, they're not real aircraft. They're not this. Well, you know what? Yeah, they are, because they have a registration number tied to them, and you have to have a pilot certificate to fly it. So, don't reject new technology, embrace it and see how it can benefit you, right?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. We've done a lot of podcasts and we partner with a lot of utility companies, and it's almost the same thing as back in the day. They go, oh, we don't need these bucket trucks. We can climb poles. It's like being resistant to technology and tools as they develop, and this is just one more tool in the toolbox of a professional public safety person. And I think you should embrace it, and the aviators should embrace it too. And we should start to think of ways that we can collaborate and use space together efficiently. I think that's a very important thing. So you talked about, you moved out of aviation into kind of more an administrative role and started building up this framework for drones and the drone department. Can you talk to us about like what were like the first kind of steps that you guys started with, and how did that process look like, and how much time? I know you said 6 months, but obviously it went much longer than that. How much time till we were fully kind of operational?
After coming off the line, looking at drone technology, and a lot of people didn't take it serious. It was novel, right? But again, from my position is like, you need to come at this as a public safety professional pilot, right? Initially, the bosses wanted to house the drone technology under aviation. I says it doesn't necessarily belong there. Anybody can do it. My recommendation would be having someone with an aviation background, whether it's airplane, whatever. At least have them administer the very first steps, so they know what the FAA is going to be looking for. And the aviation guys have their day jobs, right? So this is just one more thing on their plate. So don't reinvent the wheel is one of the things I say quite a bit. So there's policies and procedures in place. So for instance, there's a operation called Detect and Render Safe Task Force, which involves canine training in the state of New Jersey. State police trains those canines, and it's open to any public safety agency for law enforcement, right, that has canines. You come to us for the training, and then we'll put you through it. But when we need to call on you, we want you to answer the phone and come out to our job. We don't care who it is. So the same concept is what I was leading with the working group. I'm not going to take credit for just, it wasn't just my idea. It was, Department of Corrections was there, Forest Fire Service was there, Department of Transportation, various elements within the state police, field operations are the guys on the road, fatal crash guys were there, Marine guys were there. The concept was, let's stand up drones and have them deployed throughout the state of New Jersey, so you don't have one unit that has to go all over the place and you're going to wait for it. It kind of defeats the purpose of that niche filler, right? So that was how we progressed. If you wanted to fly the drones, you commit to that body, right? That body's going to have to come to the table. We're going to have to commit to the training. And then we have a weapons and tactics committee that says what units can carry what firearm or whatever, use of force piece of equipment we need. Same thing would apply to drones. You don't have different units buying whatever they want. Here's the list. Here's the menu. You pick off of this menu what's going to work for your operation, right? We're not going to force you to use a piece of equipment that just doesn't fit in your organization. So that's kind of the mindset of how we were moving forward with that.
Okay, and I think that's interesting because Sometimes you think you can get stuck in like a bit of a bureaucracy when you're dealing with state and government and municipality funds, and they don't want these selections or this flexibility. But I think that's interesting that you took the approach of right sizing it for the individual units and task force. It sounds like that it wasn't going to be a one size fits all solution, but you also weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. You would take away some of the policies and procedures that were already in place, right? And then just kind of put a drone in place of some of the other tools, or supplement those tools with a drone system. What about, was there any discussion of integration with like the command centers and emergency response, the larger kind of entities?
It was more something that I wanted to make sure that I left with was accountability. So where's the central unit that's going to house all the documentation for drone flights? Send it to one location. We're not going to boss the other units around, but we need to have accountability. So when the colonel gets a call from the legislature, hey, you guys flying drones, we heard one of your drones was over this location. Give us some information. So we had a central clearinghouse for that. That was the thought process. The jump to the civilian side after I retired on May 1, 2018. The driver for that was because there was really a lack of understanding or information out there for first responders at the time, right? It's certainly changed now. So that's kind of where I left it. Was the guy I left it in good hands. His name's Lieutenant Mike Ward, great guy. You might see his name around. He does a lot of counter UAS discussion. He's really picked the baton up and ran with it, and now the division, it's even more widespread internally than when I left it. So I left it in good hands.
That's great, and I think that's important to recognize that like you can do all the baseline and the groundwork, but then handing that baton off to somebody that's going to take it to that next level. Yep. Or keep improving. That's always important in having that. And it's not like, Ron, not like you disappeared. I'm sure you're still in contact and advise and help wherever you can. What about your stance on, or maybe I shouldn't say your stance, but what's thoughts on drone as a first responder? And for our listeners, maybe you can explain that and versus an on-call pilot. What's your thoughts with that kind of methodology? And please start with like explain it for our listeners.
Yep. So drone is a first responder. I'll have to Chula Vista because they were truly the pioneers in doing it the right way. Okay. Again, I mentioned drones appear to be novel, but they're aircraft, and it comes with responsibility. If something goes sideways and you don't know what you're talking about when the FAA comes knocking, you're in for a problem. So going back to drone as a first responder, how Chula Vista started out, they literally had people standing on roofs of the buildings, right, throughout their town under canopies. And when a job would come in, they would launch the drone and fly it to where the job was through their dispatch center. They get the coordinates, they fly their drone over and be able to get eyes on a situation or scene immediately. We're now up to the point where it's called Drone 2.0, where drone as a first responder started out one drone, one pilot. Now you have a dispatch center where you can deploy more than one drone to a job and have somebody monitor the systems that are out there. Great idea, forward thinking. Again, with the one size fits all, it's not appropriate in some areas. If you think a rural area, probably not going to work, but it's more for a densely populated area, a town. Where I see a potential issue, again, big fan. Crawl, walk, run really applies here. If you get a company that wants to sell you a DFR program, they want to sell you a DFR program. And, I see things out there, people are, bragging about going from 0 to 90 days and having your program up and running. I didn't get my aviation experience by sleeping in a Holiday Inn Express. You can attest to, it's a process where you have to learn. I'm not saying you have to know everything, but you should at least understand the basics before you get into this program and have an aviation mindset before you press that button. Again, they're machines. They fail. It happens. Manned aviation, machines fail, right? It's what you do. How do you mitigate that risk? And if you're not prepared to mitigate that risk, or if you're skirting the rules a little bit, I don't think it's going to go well for you.
We're even dealing with this in today's world with the recent NPRM around 108, how there's to what I read, almost a sense of these folks are not aviators as much as they're just operators. And I don't want to be too negative on the NPRM, but really it's we're transitioning, but I don't think we need to throw out all those years of aviation learnings and making sure that we respect the people who are responsible for drone technology that's in the air, that they're aviators, and they should have a baseline set of knowledge to support their decision making. And I think that's what you're speaking to.
What I teach my clients when I'm working with them is to go back to continuity, right? Pick a program manager and have a strong number two, so you have legacy built into your program. You're not starting all over again, right? So you don't have somebody new pick up the pieces, has no idea what you've done, and have to retrain them on anything. Aviation is a learning process. I still crack the books when I have a question about something, and it's important to understand what you're getting yourself into. I guess is really what I think I want to try to impress upon people, that it's not a novelty aircraft. Drone as a first responder is an awesome program. I see this is where we're going, but I think there's a little bit too much of a push right now to get these programs out and running. Let's slow down. Let's have a conversation. What's the vision for you? What do you want to do with a drone in your department? Right. Let's figure out the baseline there, and then we'll expand upon that.
For my listeners, I come from a background of policing as well. I myself was in the military, but on my father's side, father, stepmom, all my uncles, Sacramento PD, shout out to them. And so, I understand the importance of police officer safety. And I was wondering, and I don't want to, tee it up, but where do you see the most value in police officer safety? Is it time to scene? Is it, avoiding going into tight spaces, apprehension without, pursuing? Like, I know there's so many, but maybe our listeners can't think of like all the different various ways a drone keeps a police officer safer. Can you kind of expand on that? Where do you see those kind of impacts?
Definitely all the above, right? Force protection is a big thing, right? Again, I'm going to refer back to Chula Vista. I don't work for them. They don't pay me anything. They did it right.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing wrong with touting the model that does it right. So they had a job a few years ago where they had a call with a man with a gun somewhere. Well, they were able to get a drone overhead and see that, what that guy was playing with. Yeah, it looked like a gun, but it was actually a lighter. That little bit of piece of information to the first responding officers is important, right? Maybe it puts in the mindset de-escalation. And I'm not going to armchair quarterback a cop who does a job. If I'm not there, I'm not going to judge what you were doing unless it's something egregiously wrong. All right, I'll make that clear. But that little bit of information may have de-escalated in the officer's minds. Like, here's what I'm rolling into. It's a man with a gun, but we have this extra piece of information, right? You have a barricaded subject, and you can't, it's not safe to put a helicopter over the scene. I mean, when I was flying, we had medevac, right? We had 2 troopers in the front and civilian medics in the back, flight nurse and flight medic. If we had a police job, like a bank robbery or something like that, we would actually leave the civilians behind because we could go to the gunfire, right? So taking that risk, that exposure away from a police helicopter, I think benefits the drone because it's fractionally more, it's expensive than a full scale helicopter. You're minimizing that risk, right?
Yeah.
There's things you can drop in the water now. These inflatable buoys where you can, you're immediately on the scene. You have a drone. You can launch this thing out, into the water for somebody in trouble. Yeah. The applications are limitless. How do you build them into your program? I think is the real question.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful and funny. Quick anecdote story from my life. So I lived in Seattle for a spell. The call came in, to my wife. She's a teacher, and locked down the high school. There's a person on the high school with a gun. And in today's world, unfortunately, that's very, too often, and it's very sad. And so they lock down, and everyone's, kind of figuring out what's going on, and the police all show up, and it's, it's obviously a big deal. They find the individual who's just happened to walk in the trails that are adjacent to the school. And because in Seattle, it rains so much, no one carries umbrellas. You just wear a rain slicker. The individual was a visitor carrying an umbrella, and it was so foreign to the locals there that it had to be a gun. But to your point, the drone technology in your example de-escalated on its own what could have been a horrible situation. If you go in there thinking this is an armed person and you're in a scenario that's very dangerous. So I think that's a great example of where it can actually benefit safety on both sides of the house, the person involved and the policing officer. So what about coordination? How do you approach, coordinating with your aircraft, the medevac, with the news chopper 5 that wants to get the up to the minute, breaking news, or even general aviation? How do you think the police drone can deconflict?
Medevac and news helicopters, when we were out in the field, we would self deconflict, right? So there was common helicopter frequencies. They knew when a medevac was going out because the TV station says, "Get out here." Well, in certain, in the areas with helicopter in the Northeast, we talk cockpit to cockpit. Hey, listen, where are you? Okay, South Star was the unit that I was working at the time, so we would coordinate with the Philadelphia news stations. Hey, Philly news helicopter, South Star is coming in. We're inbound, a couple of minutes out, make a quick radio call, and they would, acknowledge. And then, we'd land, medical people would do their thing. And then, we'd make a call. Hey, listen, guys, we're about ready to lift. We're going to be heading out to the west or wherever it was going to be. So we would self-deconflict. When I talk to new clients about that stuff, I give them that example. It's like, how are you going to handle a state police helicopter coming in with a medevac, or, you have news helicopters over your scene? First of all, news helicopters have a right to be there. It's in any aviation regs, right? They have a First Amendment right to see what's going on. They don't have a right to interfere with your operation, though. So this is where the deconfliction comes into play. Do you have the phone number for the news station if you have a drone operation? How are you planning on communicating with the assets that are coming in on public safety frequency? So get them to think about that sort of thing. I was actually involved in a search in Pennsylvania. We were doing mutual aid a few years ago. There was a guy who shot 2 Pennsylvania state troopers outside of their barracks and went into the woods, and they were chasing them around for about 40 days. We had aircraft from 5 different departments, 5 different agencies. State police for New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York was there. FBI had an aircraft there. I fly in with some bosses, and one of the first things I wanted to do, we got on the ground, there was no communication. I said, "Who's the air boss here?" And they say, "What do you mean, who's the air boss?"
What's an air boss?
Who's coordinating the altitudes here?
Yeah.
So, again, I don't have all the answers, but I like to bring my experiences to have people think about this. We had a missing girl in the next town over from me where they brought in drones from different parts of the state. And, okay, who's coordinating this? Are you guys searching the same areas over and over again? Are you duplicating events? I try to get them to think about that. So
no,
you're going to take over.
That's right. And it sounds like you're saying, there is some complexity with deconfliction with drone to manned aviation, just because there's not a person on the drone to do those radio calls. And it sounds like you're supporting what I was just talking about, the importance of making an aviator who wants to utilize drone technology. And it doesn't mean you got to go to a full-blown flight school for a year and a half like you and I did, but there's somewhere in the middle between just throwing it in the back of your trunk and using it and going to that year and a half flight school. There's somewhere where there's the right size of training and getting these folks thinking about deconfliction and how to do it, and how to effectively manage that scene. That's interesting. Yep. We talked to your partner over at the Cape May site that you're responsible for, and he had an interesting kind of outtake about how, or outlook on how we have a ground aviation safety person and an air safety person. Can you expand on how you deliver, air safety principles to the Cape May testing site that we talked to him about in our last episode?
Ray's a great guy. Ray Adams, former Newark air traffic controller. I talked to him over the years and had no idea who this guy was. He was the helicopter controller for the area. And it's funny to take him out of his element. He's in that Class B, strictly, you're not going to move without us knowing you're moving, to a general aviation uncontrolled airport. And it's like, seeing a void down here, right? It's not, they do whatever they want. So it's really, it's fun to interact. So safety is the key, right? We don't want to have an accident. Things happen, but we want to make sure that what we've done is preventable to the fullest extent possible. Ray's familiar with the aviation, the airspace aspect of it, and we both focus on the ground movements. We operate on a live airport at the Cape May Wildwood Airport, And we need to integrate the aircraft that are flying down there. Interesting for if people don't know, they have N numbers on them, just like regular aircraft. So they have a right to actively use that airspace over the airport. So we get some grumblings once in a while from the other airplane guys, like, yeah, you guys are flying toys down here. I'm like, when you got a 20-foot wingspan aircraft with an N number on it, we're going to make sure that we integrate with what we're doing down here and coordinate the flights. So we listen to who's inbound to the airport, who's taxiing, and then really watch our clients when they come in to use the airspace, because you have these people that look like they're doing it by the numbers, and they'll do something completely unexpected, and you got to try to reel them in.
There's a lot to unpack there. I think the community in general, the folks that are watching this right now, are probably drone pilots and in the drone industry. And I think what we want to do by reaching out to people like yourselves and some of the others that have been on this podcast is let people know and inform and educate, everyone that drones in a sensible area and is safe and is there for a purpose. They're not trying to peek in your windows and things of this nature. They're trying to either make a lineman's job safer, preventing them from getting in a bucket truck or climbing or drive 100 miles out to fix your power line so you have healthy power, to keeping a police officer safe, or even keeping the public safe during a policing response. So it's just really trying to communicate that and let people know. So what have you found effective for that too? Is like, I'm sure you've had some community interactions. Like, what have you found effective in, assuaging those concerns or those anxieties?
You have to be open about your program. Bring the public in, show them what you're doing, show them, let them take a look at the aircraft, brag about it. We say celebrate your wins. So if you have a drone program and you have a successful outcome from a search, hit the media with that thing. Let them know that this program saved the life or shortened the uncomfortable experience of somebody out in the marsh, right? You found somebody. You really got to promote your program. I say when I'm talking to public safety is, don't say the S word. Don't say surveillance, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to turn the public off. If you are legitimately doing a job, talk to the public, tell them what you're doing. We're doing, after the fact, if you have a search warrant, you want to get a bird's eye view of the house before the cops come in there and enter the property. Fair game, right? Same thing with a police helicopter. You do the same thing, right? Just be open about it. Be able to explain, what's your procedure for your camera? Is it always on when you're going to and from a job, or you have it off until you get overhead on scene, then you turn it on, or, what's that process look like? And that cops in particular have to be a little more careful with what they do with drones, because they're under more scrutiny, and there's also constitutional issues associated with that.
Yeah.
People don't call cops to tell them they're having a good day. Firemen, on the other hand, everybody loves a fireman, right? So
I'm going to call my local police and tell them I'm having a good day today. So just see what happens. No, that's good. So we're pretty much coming up on time. I wanted to thank you for everything that you've talked about today. Thank you for your service in both in the military and the Navy, even though I won't hold that against you. But thank you for your service as a police officer. I think it's important that we recognize that there's folks out there like you who've had a long and distinguished career keeping us safe. So I appreciate that. But I know you're not perfect. So in closing, tell me about, I know we all have this story as aviators. Tell me about a time quickly where you made a little bit of a mistake and you went, wow, man, I really dodged it on that one.
There's a couple in the closet there that, come out every now and then. Usually if there's a couple of bourbons involved is when you start talking about it, right?
Okay. So you want to take a pass. Okay. I hear you. So we'll have to have a little bit of bourbon and share a story on that one then in a future date.
No, it's all good. Yeah. One of the things that stand out, I was going through some flight training there, and, under instruments, right? So you had these goggles on, there's a little window you can see out of where you're only supposed to look at the panel, right? My safety pilot, he was more worried about me deviating from my course because I'm new at this stuff and I wasn't good at it. I still get rusty, right?
Sure.
So, we're flying into the airport on the bearing on a radio, radio talk for non-aviators. It was just a radio beacon taking us into an airport. And I hear him say, "Holy F-bomb." And I look up and I see the wing of an aircraft below in my chin bubble. I'm like, oh, he was,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, and we landed. And I called it a day at that point. It's like I was done. But that
Yeah, yeah.
if you're flying long enough, it's like driving. You're gonna have things that are gonna make you go, "Ooh, let's not do that again."
That's 100% right. And the most important thing from that is you learn and you
Yep.
don't do it again. So, hey, thank you, Ron. It's been nice catching up with you. Nice seeing you. For all of our listeners, if you want to, like we talked about last time, the Cape May resources will be in our YouTube, and maybe you'll go out there and see Ron and the team doing a test out in the Cape May area. Otherwise, thank you again for your time and service. I appreciate it.
Real quick for a plug for you guys, USI, and yeah, I should have done this sooner, but we start talking war stories and things like that. What I found about USI was how they align themselves with full scale aviation. Think players like Flight Safety International, CAE, that do professional pilot training and certify the pilots as being competent in that machine. That's where I see USI being a really cutting edge outfit by getting that professionalism, establishing that, and saying, listen, if you follow these guidelines here, we're going to say you're good to go. We're going to back our training and back the pilot as well. So I think early on when I saw you guys, I thought that was a really, really cool thing that you were doing, because nobody else is doing it.
I appreciate that very much. I mean, we take our curriculum and our training and the bar we set very seriously. We want to make sure that we're producing world-class drone aviators and drone programs. So thank you. I appreciate that. All right. It's great chatting with you. And until next time, Ron, good seeing you.
That's good.
Thanks, Ron. Great commentary on integration of drones for public safety. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. I was amazed to learn how drones support safety of not just responding officers, but the public as well. Thanks for watching. Can't wait to speak to you again soon. Bye for now.